Robot Talk is the podcast that sits down with robot enthusiasts from around the world and asks them the questions you always wanted answered. Like, will people accept this robot? And how does that thing work? Hello everyone! Welcome to Robot Talk. I'm your host, Claire Asher, and this week's episode is about trust and acceptance of robots, and how roboticists can design robots that people actually want to interact with. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to join the Robot Talk community on Patreon, where I'll be sharing behind-the-scenes updates, and you can chat with me and other Robot Talk listeners. You can also sign up to support the podcast for just £5 a month. And if you do, not only will you get a warm, fuzzy feeling for helping me to keep producing and expanding the podcast, but you'll also get access to exclusive bonus episodes and lots of other cool perks. Check out patreon.com/Claire Asher to find out more. The first 20 Patreon supporters get a free sticker, so don't procrastinate, join today. So, without further ado, it's time for me to introduce this week's guest. I recently had a great discussion with Gisela Reyes-Cruz from the University of Nottingham about how humans interact with, trust, and accept robots. Today, I'm chatting to Gisela Reyes-Cruz, a transitional assistant professor at the University of Nottingham, whose work focuses on trust and public acceptance of robots. Hi Gisela, welcome to Robot Talk.
Hi Claire, thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your research on human-robot interaction?
Yes, so firstly, my background is on human-computer interaction. So broadly, I'm interested in how we all interact with technology, how we experience it in general. So for the past 3 years or so, I have been working, maybe more than 3 years, but I've been working in this UK-wide research program called Trustworthy Autonomous Systems. So I have been involved in a variety of projects, like 7,
Wow.
about different topics, really different technologies. And many of those are robots. So, for instance, a UVC robot for disinfection,
Okay.
Telepresence robots as well. I've been doing lots of stuff with Telepresence robots, and also some social robots.
Okay, fantastic. So what kind of methods do you use to kind of understand how people interact with robots?
Yeah, so like I said, my background is HCI and specifically ethnography. So if you're not familiar with this, it's a very qualitative method, basically observing observing real world interactions. We're really going a little bit out of the lab sometimes. And even when we do stuff in the lab, it's observing that naturalistic reactions and interactions with technologies. In this case, these robots. So that's really where I come from. I really love to do that. And I also consider myself a robot wrangler, which is a funny term we use here at our lab in Nottingham. There's a bunch of us who are in charge of the robots in the facilities, and we're always doing like demonstrations or public engagement activities. And that sort of also, it's like it adds to my ethnographic experience, right?
Yeah.
Like my understanding of the robots and how people do things and how they react to them.
Yeah. I mean, when your research is observing people interacting with robots, then I guess almost everything is work for you.
Yeah. I'm always sort of like curious and observing people. Because sometimes we do events and we bring the robots to some places. Earlier this year, we did an business expo, and we brought the robots, and it was just fascinating to see reactions of really the general public, how you have very different views and reactions to the robots.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that links quite nicely into the next thing I wanted to ask you, which was about like what factors affect whether people trust robots, whether they accept them, whether that's, in their workplace or in their homes or perhaps, out in the street. And I guess I'm thinking both in terms of like obviously features and of the design of the robot itself, but also like their own previous experiences and their own background that might influence how they feel about robots.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying, we are part of this program, Trustworthy Autonomous System. So all of it is about trust. Like, what does it mean to trust technology in a system that does things on its own, right? So
Yeah.
we've been discussing like various layers. It's not only a yes, I trust it or I don't
Yeah.
trust it. So, for instance, trust in the technology itself. Does it work? And you will have people testing that. If it's a robot that is navigating, they will get in their way and be like, okay, do you work? So that
Yeah.
adds to their trust, right? Like, okay, the robot will do what it's supposed to be doing, and it's efficient or accurate. Another factors are trust in the design considerations. So not only technically being good, but does it consider people around them? Like, does it understand that how people move, how we inhabit the world, basically?
Yeah.
The social conditions. Other factors are trusting people and the institutions that are deploying these robots. We recently did this study. We brought a Temi robot to a gallery here in our university. And we know it a lot is like, what's the relationship of people, the visitors to this gallery? Do they trust the place? And they'll be like, okay, this is another activity they do. So they did sort of see it as something the gallery did, not so much a research project. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
So the relationship of people with the either company or institution that is deploying this. I can keep mentioning other factors, but I'll keep it there.
So talked a lot about trust. What does it mean to accept a robot, and how is acceptance different from trust?
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I think we're also working on some stuff about acceptance and adoption of telepresence robots, right? Especially in the context of museums. What will it take for museum professionals to do this? So it's like there's an initial acceptance, I suppose, in which you get familiar with the technology, with the robot, and you're like, okay, that's fine. But in the long term, what does that mean? Are the conditions in place for us to adopt this in the longer run? So I think there's a time factor there.
Okay.
So so that's important, and also because at the beginning there's a novelty effect. It will be with the robots, especially at the beginning, is something like it's very curious and it's interesting, but over time, and I say it myself as a robot wrangler, over time you sort of get desensitized to the robots, and you're like, oh, they're annoying. They're glitchy. They disconnect from the Wi-Fi, and they're like printers because sometimes they smell your fear when you have an important demo. And they just don't work. so yeah, I think that's the factor time. It's a huge important thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier actually, and how when you first interact with a robot, it's just amazing that it can do anything, and that it's moving around on its own, and it's so exciting. And then over time you start to kind of notice the flaws and the kind of little foibles and the ways that it isn't perfect, which is true of any technology, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like to do public engagement or just like research studies with people from the general public, because that sort of reminds me like, oh, okay, I'm familiar with these robots, but people still find them fascinating, and they will come up with ideas of what to do, how to integrate them in the work or the activities they do in their day-to-day. So
yeah, I guess as well, like trusting a robot that you're interacting with in a museum, or that is vacuuming your house, or is kind of, there's not a lot of risk involved, it's kind of a little bit lighthearted, versus like maybe a robot that you're working with in a dangerous environment. Like that trust element is very different in those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another factor, another layer of trust I was thinking of as well, because, yeah, for instance, in that study about UVC robot for disinfection, so there's the element of, is the robot safe? Actually, you cannot be in the same room when the robot is operating.
Because of the UV light.
Yeah, but like, do I trust the robot did a good job disinfecting the
Yeah.
place? So that study was about that, like how to ensure or how to communicate how the robot did the work. Like people being like, this is a critical environment. Especially this happened during COVID. So at the time, it was like, okay, this is important, and we see how fitting this robot could be, how helpful it could be. In the study, professional cleaners participated, and they were like, okay, this is a complement to our work. This is something could help us.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, it will depend on the context, because if it's at home and there's your vacuum cleaner, and if it fails, especially in the context of failing,
Yeah.
if it doesn't do its work, then it's just maybe annoying.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but if it's in a context where it can become dangerous, then people are a bit more wary of trusting it.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess in the example of the disinfecting robot, it's harder to build trust there because you can't see that it's done its job well. Whereas, like, I don't know, a robot that picks something up or carries something, you can see that it's picked it up and carried it, whereas germs are invisible. So it's much more difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm also interested in like how we do these demonstrations of the robots, right? So it's always about showing the robot it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. But yeah,
Yeah.
in this context of the UVC disinfection, so in study they presented like different ways, like having a visualization of, oh, these are the areas that the robot disinfected, or a video of the robots going around the room. So it's about showing those ways,
Yeah.
and making people, yeah, to reassure them that the robot is working as it's supposed to.
Mm. So you mentioned earlier that you also work on, like, how people interact with technology and computers generally. Do you think that people are more or less trusting of robots compared to like other technologies?
Yeah, I think naturally people are a bit less trustful of robots, but
Mm.
I think it's because of that novelty.
Okay.
It's something different. And it depends on the people as well, because
Mm.
sometimes we have, kids love the robots.
Yeah.
They don't even think it twice. They just directly come and push the buttons, or
Yeah.
they touch. And there's people, I will say, like older people sometimes are a bit more like, what's that? It creeps me out. We have the Boston Dynamics robot Spot.
The spot dog, yeah.
Yeah, and that it's really interesting how some people are like, it's just creepy.
Yeah. I find it quite cute personally,
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
but I've definitely met people who think it's creepy.
Yeah, it had to grow on me, because I was a bit like not very sure about it at the beginning, but then yeah, you get
Mm.
familiar, you get desensitized when you're so close to the robots and you see them over and over. So I think that's part of it. As robots become more prevalent in our activities, there's, and I'm talking about the UK context, of course, because obviously other countries, they're more familiar. People are more familiar with them.
Mm.
Yeah, trust levels vary according to their context and the level of familiarity and exposure to the robots.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder how much of a role sci-fi has played in making people a little bit distrustful of robots.
Yeah, for sure. Especially nowadays with this whole AI doom,
Mm.
doom and gloom. Because yeah,
Yeah.
we see all of this, and just this whole thing about everything is AI and what does it mean, and people, I
Mm.
think, yeah, people being just wary about it. But then I think one part of sort of demystifying that the robots are not taking over. At least not the ones we have,
Yeah.
it's just for them to see, like, oh, they can be clunky, but at the same time, like, sure, they can be really fascinating, and they're very complex and amazing technologies. But at the same time, if you put them out there in our world, they cannot really do much. um,
Yeah.
so I think that's important. And another thing, people have to do a lot of work to make them work. So I think that will be really interesting for people, for the general public, to
Mm.
understand and to know that yeah, we're so far away from robots taking over.
Yeah. So another focus of your work has been like accessibility and social justice in relation to human robot interactions. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, this is from my HCI background. So my PhD I did on technologies used by people with visual impairments. So it
Okay.
was not necessarily robots, but a lot of
Mm.
like what informs me and how I approach research comes from that. Because
Yeah.
yeah, you develop sensitivity about what does it mean to make things accessible for people with disabilities, and just learning that when you do that, when you ensure things are accessible for people, then it's accessible for everyone.
Mm.
Everyone benefits in the end.
Yeah.
So once I started working with robots, something really interesting was realizing, yeah, actually, robots need accessibility accommodations. Like,
Mm.
for instance, for bringing these telepresence robots to museums and galleries, not many places have the infrastructure to adopt them, even if they want
Mm.
them. Sometimes museums are like listed buildings, or
Right.
um, they just don't have ramps or accessible entrance. Even if
Mm.
they have a lift, how do you make a robot take a lift?
Yeah.
So it's a very basic challenge there, but right now, the robots are not really doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit more like, what can we learn about accessibility that we can apply to robotics and in human robot interaction?
Yeah. That's so interesting. And I guess like every use case will have its own unique kind of aspects of what does accessibility mean for that particular robot, and maybe for that, for that particular task or whatever that it's being used for.
Yeah, yeah, and another thing I find is that sometimes when you present robots to people, and people are like, well, I don't see the point of this, but then they think, actually, this could be really helpful for people with disabilities, so for a
Mm.
person who cannot move, or for a person who needs, in the context, for instance, of the museum, could be really helpful for people with learning disabilities, to keep them engaged, or to do some more interactive way of experiencing an exhibition.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will dare to say, in any sort of case of a robot doing something, if you add that element of how will this work for a person with disabilities, it will bring more opportunities, and it maybe will, yeah, open up ways of how to solve the problems.
Yeah. I'm thinking as well in terms of the accessibility of how robots are controlled, because I guess for some older people, a lot of the control systems for robots might not be that intuitive, or might be, seem very difficult to kind of understand.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think we've noticed that as well when so the telepresence robot we use is the double tree. And
Okay.
yes, so we had some people in workshops trying to use them for the first time, and I don't know if you've used it, but it's just like a Zoom call interface kind of thing.
Mm.
And just yeah, because you're doing a video call, and then you use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move the robot.
Yeah.
So for an older person, that's not intuitive. But for a younger person, for a kid, they immediately do it. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting to see. And yeah, I suppose there's a space there for how do we make interfaces that maybe not one single interface. There's no one size fits
Mm.
all. But how can we present this in different ways for different people that have different
Mm.
needs? and different approaches to, engage with technology.
Yeah.
So there's many ways that accessibility can be embedded, like from the side of the controlling a robot, and also from the side of getting in touch with the actual robot.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So many areas to research. Gisela, it's been lovely talking to you today. I've been speaking to Gisela Reyes-Cruz from the University of Nottingham. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy Robot Talk, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the podcast, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps boost the podcast, so thanks in advance. And make sure you check out @Robot Talk Pod on social media to see a photo of a Telepresence robot working to make museums more accessible. Next week, I'll be chatting to Matt Bean from the University of California, Santa Barbara about robots and AI in the workplace. Until then, I've been Claire Asher, and this has been Robot Talk. Robot Talk is brought to you by the Hamlin Centre, Imperial College London.